Did you press the button?
Yeah. Hey, Husker fans. Welcome to the Husker Big Red YouTube channel. We're back for another chat here with some Nebraska football recruiting. Hopefully, you didn't catch Danny swearing there, but you probably did. But
Yeah,
at any rate,
it
we're
went
going
live right after. So I mean,
to.
this is the beauty of live broadcasts. You never know what you're gonna get.
But yeah, we're back here for another episode here with the Husker Big Red Football channel. Basically, we're going to be going live here every Saturday. Is going to be the plan going forward with the Nebraska football season here approaching. So we're going to be doing our normal podcasts here on Mondays, and then with the season starting, we're going to be doing some chats here on Saturdays. When game days are coming, we're going to have some pre-game chats, some post-game chats. So you're going to have a chance to, hang out with the Husker Big Red crew this Saturday or this season if you want to on your Saturdays. So that's kind of where the idea comes from.
And I think there's going to be a lot to chat about. Hopefully, there's going to be a lot of news, a lot of things to chat about. You might hear me swearing occasionally, but you know what? We pride ourselves on being raw and authentic. I'm not going to swear all the time, but after a rough game or a close game, you may get the authentic me, and I'm all about authenticity. I'm not like the rivals guys or any of the big guys. This is who we are. So I'm excited to really kind of, get things going. And we're very close to the season, Chris. It's coming up.
Yeah, we're less than 10 days now. We're about, 8 days away from the start of fall camp on the July 30th. Big Ten Media Days is this week. So that'll be interesting to, get kind of our first glimpse of Matt Rule, at the podium. I guess just in a long time. He hasn't kind of done a, stand-up press conference in a while. So that'll be interesting, although it's a pretty, limited period. You can get kind of more out of the breakout sessions with the local media, I think, than kind of those 5 minutes that he gets at the podium. But yeah, it'll be interesting in Indianapolis, and it won't be long before that Minnesota game starts. So I'm ready for it, man. I'm ready to see what this product is going to look like on the field.
And I'm excited to see Ethan Piper and Luke Reimer at the podium next week. Those guys, I feel like you don't hear a lot from in terms of media. I feel like you hear a lot from the offensive skill players, and you know, rightfully so. I think Jeff Sims is going to have a big hand in all of that, and I'm sure we're going to get to hear a lot from him as well. But Reimer is a guy that had he's been a 100 tackle player, so he's a huge part of the defense, and I'm excited to just see him at media days next week. Granted, media days are going to be probably baseline questions and stuff like that, but it's going to be exciting to see these guys kind of really step up and take on a bigger role because, like we kind of mentioned, if you go to media days, you're obviously going to have a huge hand in what the team is going to do for the upcoming season. So I'm excited to see what a guy like Piper has to say, even if it is only for a few minutes.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. Everybody, made it like a big topic of conversation. Like, oh, Quentin Newsom didn't get picked to be a captain or whatever. So I always think that that's people overthink
Don't they always though?
everything.
Yeah. Don't
Yeah.
they always make the big topics of conversation? And thankfully, we won't have to do that anymore. We're gonna have some real stuff to talk about, and hopefully, hopefully things go according to plan, at least for the start of camp, aka no injuries or anything like that either. Because to me, injuries were kind of scary during the spring game, especially on the offensive line with I believe it was Cochran that went out, but hopefully everybody stays healthy. That's my main goal for this camp.
Yeah, that's always a big thing is keeping everybody healthy. Yeah, that is a big question. Quarterback, offensive tackle. Just got a few people kind of trickling in here to the chat. So if you guys, if you're watching, throw some questions in. Let us know that you're here. Let us know, any topics that you have for Nebraska football recruiting. We want to try to get this interaction going and have this be sort of a weekly thing here with the season coming up. So just I guess to switch topics for Nebraska recruiting, there not a ton of news this week, but there was some. I guess the thing that pops into my head first is, Gatelin Bear is going to be announcing his decision August 5th. I know that
Yeah.
you kind of messaged me, Danny, I have a little bit on the Michigan side, do you think Michigan's going to be the favorite or, where do you, where does Nebraska kind of stand with Gatelin Bear? And I don't, I honestly think Nebraska is probably on the lower end of that top
Yeah.
five, but you never know what can happen. So, do you think there's any hope for Nebraska, in this recruitment to pull out kind of a surprise at the end?
No, we have 75,000 wide receivers already, and I think part of the reason why we already have 75,000 wide receivers is that we're not going to take Bear. I mean, again, I respect, his mission process and things like that, but 2 years is a long time to wait for a wide receiver to go to a program, and so as much as like if we land him, I would be extremely excited, but I understand why we have so many wide receivers in the room already, and I understand that this is kind of a long-term recruitment. So I'm not expecting him to go to Nebraska. I think Michigan has a fair shot at it. I know Oregon is in play. So, I mean, I think Nebraska, it would work out better for both parties. Bear in terms of playing time and Nebraska in terms of, um, you know, positional outlook for the future if he went somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I would be okay. It's just because he's in 2026. I don't think it really. I mean, I know they have a lot of receivers now, but the situation could look totally different in 2 years. And this guy right now is a junior in high school, runs
Yeah.
faster than Tyreek Hill. So whether he wants to play, 4 years from now or 2 years from now, that's Nebraska hasn't had a talent like Tyreek Hill basically ever that I can think of. So, I would say if he wants to come to Nebraska, I would still take him. Even though he wants to wait, for 2026. I know that. I mean, Michigan's going to take him. I think Boise State is a sleeper, though. They're hosting him for an official visit. Next weekend. Not official because you can't take official visits during that time, but basically it's going to be an extended unofficial visit. And I think after that, Boise State is a team to monitor in this thing just because they've really sold him on kind of being the hometown hero, and he would obviously be able to come back there, and I think kind of step in right away, but. I don't know. It's interesting to me that Nebraska, the whole recruitment, because it seemed like they were the favorite. Sean. That's the thing is Sean Callahan is the only expert from On3 or 24/7 that's even put in a pick right now, and it's for Michigan at 25%. I don't think Michigan even feels like they're the leader. I don't think that any team feels confident with Bear right now. So I don't know if Nebraska. It seems like Nebraska though stopped kind of recruiting him at some point. I mean, once once he said that he wasn't going to take an official visit this summer to Nebraska, but he was wanted to decide before his senior season. I mean, that kind of told you everything that you needed to know. If he's not going to visit before he decides, then you probably don't have a very good chance.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also have to wonder, 2 years from now, what he is going to, what is he going to be like on the physical side of things? Is he still going to have that speed? I mean, he's probably not going to lose it. Let's be real here. But there's always the caveat of, 2 years from now, will he still be the same player physically, that he is right now? And, there's a lot of different variables to take into with Bears recruitment. And, like you said, not taking an official visit, having interest in the beginning of the recruitment, but kind of stopping, kind of tells a lot. So, I personally think Nebraska is looking elsewhere, and I wouldn't expect him to come to Nebraska. Would I want him at Nebraska if he committed? Absolutely. But there's just a lot of other, factors in play, and I think Nebraska is going to sit this one out.
Yeah, I think so too. We'll get the official word soon, but at any rate, we did have our first chat. I'm not sure. NS Schluter says, "Good morning, fellas. So damn excited to get the season rolling. Well, I'm excited too. I'm really excited about
Yeah.
the Matt Rule era. Probably mispronounced the last name, but you guys can read it there. Thanks for joining us on the chat. And it's an exciting time to be a Nebraska fan. I mean, not that we haven't had, we've all been excited, in the past with Scott Frost. And I'm not going to say Mike Riley. I was never really that excited about Mike Riley, but, whatever. But I do think that there's a lot to be excited about with this season. I know one thing that was interesting yesterday, Colorado announced that they sold out, the Nebraska game. It was one of the games that was sold out, but it just made me wonder how many of those seats, how many of those tickets do you think have been sold to Nebraska fans as opposed to just Colorado fans?
Well, initially they weren't selling them technically to Nebraska fans, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't know. It's gonna be interesting. I remember actually my first season covering the team. I believe it was 2019, and it was the Colorado game. and their quarterback Steven Montez absolutely lit Nebraska up. But anyway, there was a sea of red in 2019 for the Colorado game, and Colorado did not take too kindly to that. So I think we might see the same thing. And it's going to be quite the day. Coach Prime and Coach Rule, two first-year coaches with their respective programs, and I would love to beat the absolute bag out of Colorado. Nothing would make me happier, but we got to get through Minnesota first before we can start thinking about Colorado.
Yeah, and I just am wondering how they can, I know that they can probably give some to their season ticket holders, but I'm not sure how they can prevent Nebraska. I think they're trying to like encourage their people to buy them up, but there's going to be a big sea of red there. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I mean, there's a big
Maybe,
sea of red everywhere. You saw when we went
yeah,
to Ireland, there was Nebraska fans everywhere.
yeah.
So you can't really
It,
stop Nebraska fans from going anywhere.
No, it might not be like it was in 2019 or whenever that last game was. Maybe that's not when it. Maybe it was later than 2019. I
Oh, it's
guess that
2019,
makes
yeah.
sense. So maybe it might not be the same then because I know Colorado fans are pretty excited, looking at the spring game and stuff. But I don't know. I just don't think that Colorado is going to be on Nebraska's level. I just feel like that the way that Prime's trying to build things it could get there, but I don't think they're going to have the infrastructure to win very many games this season. That's just my opinion, but I could totally be wrong. But I feel like Nebraska's a lot closer in terms of what Matt Rule was taking over compared to Coach Prime.
Colorado's trying to build a brand. Nebraska's trying to build a program. I mean, that's what it comes down to. And I think it's gonna be fun to watch though. I'm not saying that Colorado is gonna be an easy win or whatever, but it just the hype surrounding the game and you know the old rivalry, Colorado Nebraska, is now getting some new blood in it, and it's very exciting. And I can't wait. I can't wait for the season. I can't wait to see what this team can do. And I think the schedule, like I've said before, is very favorable. So we'll see. We'll see how it all plays out. I mean, I've said this before. I said this in 2021, and look how that played out. But I think this year I feel really good about where this program is headed.
I do feel good. I still think there's some question. There's still a lot of question marks though, and you know, like can Jeff Sims make it through an entire season? Can the offensive line stay healthy? I mean, we saw how injuries on the offensive line
Yeah.
kind of just derailed the season last year. So that left tackle spot is really a question mark still. I really, is Teddy. Prajaka, he still hasn't, played a whole lot. I mean, the guy's like 6'10", 300. So I don't know if he can, I don't know if he can make it through a season and be effective, So I just have a big question mark there because if he goes down, then, maybe you're moving Corcoran over there. I'm not really sure. I know they've got some other guys that they've added in the portal. I know I really like Gunnar Gatula as a young kind of offensive tackle, but just that position in general is and in both tackle spots because I still have to see it from Bryce Benhurt. I still want to see him be consistent for, it's one thing to look good in a spring game and limited reps. It's another thing entirely to do it against, like all Big Ten potential players on the other side of the field. So I still have huge question marks about those tackle positions on offense.
And with that, we saw last year comes the production of Anthony Grant. If he doesn't have a good line again, I mean, he's going to struggle some games. And I think, you know, EJ Barthel talked earlier this week about, Grant continuing to learn assignments and blocking schemes and how to block. And I think that's extremely important in the Big Ten. And, just having him continue, meaning Grant, to work on his game and work on his craft to become an overall, well-rounded running back is important because, quite honestly, I don't think he was able to get by a lot on skill last year, but I don't know how much, blocking and additional, scheme knowledge he had because, quite frankly, I don't think that the running backs coach last year, I believe it was Ryan Held. I had a blank. I had a blank there for a second, but I truthfully don't believe he was that detailed in what he tried to coach. Barthel, I think, is a little bit more detailed. I mean, we heard from Isaac Dickey about how much Barthel loves the game, so I feel like the room is in better hands now.
Yeah, it was a different running backs coach last year. I'm blanking on the name, but any
Was
rate,
it Ron Brown?
no, he had ties to Texas. Ron Brown's still on this. He's a
Okay.
support staff guy. Um, but at any rate, yeah, the running back, I feel like that Grant did a solid job last year. There was definitely times where I felt like he could be more patient and trying to pick out holes. I mean, it seems like it's the second he gets the ball, he just kind of goes like 100 miles an hour toward the line of scrimmage. So I think EJ Barthel even talked about that here recently about trying to, teach him a little more patience. And so, yeah, I mean, Anthony Grant, both of those backs, are going to have to kind of step up this year. Ramir Johnson as well. And in terms of, recruiting, we were kind of talking about offensive tackles, and it seems like kind of a good segue because that is, if you look at, the needs left in this 2024 recruiting class, offensive tackle, I think is right up there, in terms of some of the needs that Nebraska fills. For me, I know they got Preston Tauma this week, and he's a guy I definitely think can play tackle. I feel like he's a right tackle for sure. I feel like Gibson Pyle could potentially be a tackle at Nebraska. He plays tackle in high school. He's just not, he doesn't necessarily have the measurables to be a tackle, but I don't necessarily in this recruiting class though see a left tackle. Somebody that's got the size and the ability to be that blind side protector. That's where Grant Bricks and Brandon Baker could come into play. Grant Bricks it's been Nebraska does have one projection from Brian Munson from On3. Kansas State has one from Ryan Wallace of Kansas State. From 20, that's the crystal ball 24/7. So really, it's kind of up in the air right now. So where do you think Nebraska stands? Do you feel confident with Grant Bricks or Brandon Baker, and do you have a preference with one of those two guys? Because I don't know that Nebraska's going to get both.
Well, to answer your first question, do I feel confident? I feel more confident with Bricks than I do with Baker. I like that Baker is taking an official visit. I believe in the fall, he's going to take an official visit to Nebraska, so I like that. But to me, it's either Preston, which you already have, and Bricks or Baker, or I don't see us taking three offensive linemen in addition to what we already have. And Baker is probably just scoping out his options and things like that. But I think if Baker was a guarantee to come here, we wouldn't necessarily see a crystal ball for Bricks. And so for that reason, I don't think Baker's coming. I would like him to come here, but his offer sheet is just too big, and the schools that are interested in him, are some pretty good competition. And so for that reason, I think the staff probably already knew that Baker wasn't coming here. I think Baker visiting is more just a formality at this point, but I feel a lot better with Bricks. And to Mitch's point, he likes the attention from Husker Nation. I agree, and I've said that before. He likes the social media aspect of it, and he likes to get interactions on Twitter and things like that. But I mean, to say that we aren't even recruiting Baker anymore if he's taking an official visit, I don't know how true that is. I guess I'll turn it over to you there, Chris. But
Well, yeah. So let's. Mitch has a couple of points here. Thanks for
which are
joining the
good
chat
points. Yeah.
today, Mitch. And yeah, so makes the point here. About the top eight. We were just in Brandon Baker's top eight, and just to leave this
Oop,
comment up for just a sec here.
sorry, Chris.
Yeah. So Brandon Baker isn't coming to Nebraska. This is from Mitch. He kept us in his top eight because he likes the attention from the Husker Nation. I definitely think there is some truth to that. And also to this point, Danny, you were talking about, I don't believe that Brandon Baker hasn't set an official visit. He said he was thinking about taking a visit to Nebraska. So let's be clear about that. He hasn't, there is no visit set up at this point.
I thought there was an
So
official date set up
no,
for the
not that I've
fall.
seen. No, no, no. That would be a much different story. If he's got an official visit, then that would be news to me. That also would tell me that Nebraska, like you don't host somebody for an official visit unless they're serious on your board. Like that's because you only get 56 of them as a team. I know
Right.
players can take as many as they want. They used to be restricted to five. But Nebraska's still like, so if they take Brandon Baker for an official visit, that would be a pretty big deal to me because they don't like with the transfer portal and stuff and with late recruiting, those aren't they don't have like an unlimited amount of those. So we'll see how that goes. But I would think if Baker has an official date, set and he's coming, then I would think that puts Nebraska very squarely in the mix because what he said to basically Adam Gorney was essentially like, I'm either going to commit before the season or I'm going to take a visit to Nebraska. So if he takes a visit to Nebraska, that tells me that that's at least going to give him something to think about. So I do think that that's a debatable point, kind of up in the air. But yeah, if not, then I kind of tend to agree. I've said this before, but until he's got that official visit locked in, like I'm not going to take it too serious with Brandon Baker.
And to Mitch's point on the screen here, I could say the same thing about Nathaniel Frazier as well, honestly, at this point, because I don't think we have a real shot at him either, to be completely honest with you.
Well, so I mean, Nathaniel Frazier's been projected to Georgia like this week, recently. So
Yeah,
Georgia's probably going to win that recruitment. So definitely, I don't
yeah.
think that's I don't take that seriously at all. And actually, the other running back we were looking at, who's kind of the slot back, he's actually got projected to UCLA. So it's I think right now in terms of running backs, we're looking at Caden Durham, or bust basically. So that's kind of where things stand, I believe.
Yeah, and I think I'm just happy we were able to land Lacey because at least that gives us, some depth for the future. But I mean, we'll have to see how running back recruiting continues to play out because that's still an important position that we need to recruit, and I believe that there's a lot of talent in the coming classes in order to do so. So hopefully Barthel can land some commitments in future classes because through injuries or whatever, running back depth can get thin in a hurry.
Yeah, so Derek McFall, that was the guy that I was talking
Yep.
about. So he just got a projection to UCLA. Not that is the end all be all. The things definitely can change. We've seen that, for sure. It is interesting, I think, with Grant Bricks. Going back to him, he's kind of the guy, and I feel like it's much more realistic that Nebraska is able to get Grant
Yeah.
Bricks, than Brandon Baker. That being said, there's some other programs. Alabama's really been in the mix. Notre Dame's kind of coming on, in the mix. So we'll see what happens with his kind of his timeline. He hasn't really set a firm date. He just has kind of said like, oh, maybe before the season starts, which that generally is the timeline with a lot of kids. They want to do it before their high school season, which would be in the next few weeks basically. So I don't know if Grant Bricks is going to decide in that timeline. If he does, I feel like Nebraska's in a good spot. They got one of the last official visits, maybe the last official visit. I'm just blanking a little bit on the calendar. I know we took Kansas State and Alabama, right, kind of all in that
I
same
can look that up for you
time
while you
frame.
talk.
But
But
but anyway, I know that he's from Iowa. Iowa's not really one of the teams that's kind of in the mix there. So I feel like Nebraska's kind of in a good spot. And yeah, at any rate, I feel like that is one of the big needs, though, offensive tackle. I know that this recruiting class with Rayola, that is put together on the offensive line, it's sitting pretty well, especially with Tauma committing this week. I think he's one of the biggest, outside of Carter Nelson, he's probably the biggest commitment in this class. I mean, I shouldn't say that because Danny Kalen is obviously, right there. But outside of the in-state guys, I really think that he's, as much as I love Keywan Lacey, you need really good offensive linemen to win in the Big Ten, and Preston Down was a guy that I feel like you can win with in the Big Ten.
and to answer your or follow up to your point, Bricks visited on June 23rd for an official
Okay,
to
so
Nebraska. So, and I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were telling me about all sorts of strategies offensively and things like that, and they brought up an interesting point that you kind of already know, but it's worth repeating. If you have a good offensive line and you have good players around, that and or not even good players, but average players around that offensive line, you can make those average players, look really good. And I'm not saying Kwan Lacey is average by any stretch of the imagination, but my point is a good offensive line makes everybody around you better, even if they may not necessarily be a 5-star recruit. You don't need 5-star recruits if you have a good offensive line at running back or at quarterback, for example.
yeah, that's a good point. You don't need five-star recruits if you have dominant offensive line play, and we've seen not even you don't have to recruit you know the five-star guy. I mean, Minnesota last year came in the second half and they whipped our butt in the trenches, and they've got a bunch of 3-star guys, and Wisconsin's done that stuff like for years. I mean,
Yeah.
that they will recruit quality offensive linemen. I know they've had a bunch of guys drafted. I'm not saying that, but like the majority of their guys are in that 3-star range. So if you know what you're looking for, And if you know how to develop them, you don't have to be a team full of 5-star talents. That's pretty much like, and Michigan I think has proven that too. I mean,
Yeah.
they definitely have a bunch of NFL caliber players. They recruit blue chips, but they don't have their roster's not littered with, like, not like Georgia and Ohio State and Alabama. They're not littered with like top 50 players, but they know how to recruit them. They know how to evaluate them. They know how to get them in through the strength program, and they know how to develop them. In terms of the football stuff too. And I do think that there is, and I think that Matt Rule kind of believes in this, but I think there is very some truth to the fact that, like, football is not a skill game. It's a game of size, strength, and speed as much as it is a skill. And I think Matt Rule really understands that.
I mean, just to put things in perspective, my friend Chris Lindstrom was the 14th overall pick with the Atlanta Falcons in the first round a couple of years ago, and now he's a Pro Bowler and an All Pro. So he was a three-star recruit. He was recruited by BC and Penn State, and he was able to forge a successful career there, and then go on to the NFL. So it just goes to show that with offensive lineman evaluations, sometimes recruiting a three-star lineman over a five-star lineman isn't the disaster that it may be at some other positions. It's hard to evaluate offensive linemen, and a lot of times, I mean, we're seeing with Gibson Pyle now too. The three-star linemen get overlooked and undervalued, and they turn out to be pretty good players.
I think just with, like, one thing Nebraska really looks at, with Matt Rule and really all their coaches, but just trying to get guys that have those kind of NFL type of measurable skill sets or can be developed into that. Like, maybe. I mean, there's quite a few guys, and I'm trying to think, but just off the top of my head. But, like, I mean, Braylon Pruitt, to me, I mean, he's a guy that really looks like a potential NFL player. You know what I mean? Like, not maybe right now, but once you develop him and once they find the right position for him. And then, like, another guy, I think, and this is a point I wanted to make, and it's just popping into my head right now, so I'm going to make it right at this moment. But I think that Nebraska football fans are not talking enough about Roger Gradney and what this guy can do. I mean, he's like a 6'3". I mean, I can't remember exactly how much he weighs, but I saw him at some recent highlights, and he looked really
Yeah.
dynamic at wide receiver and cornerback. And so it's like, man, this guy's going to be in the NFL. I guarantee it. He's going to be an NFL player someday, probably as a defensive back. I could see him playing receiver too, but just if you can get a 6'3" guy that can really, really play defensive back, you put him there and you just forget about it because he's going to lock down one side of the field. And I feel like Roger Gradney is going to be that kind of player at Nebraska.
And I feel like Ian Flint also falls into the category of being overlooked. I was watching some of his, highlights the other day, and he can run after the catch. He's a great catcher. He moves quickly, and I think he's going to be a great addition to the tight end room. So there's a lot of guys. We talked about so many names like the Kalins and the Hall and McMorris, but there's other guys too. And Gradney's a four-star recruit, for example. So I think guys like Flint and Gradney will also be able to really make an impact as well.
And it's crazy when you look at. I just pulled up Gradney, and what I like kind of about the On Three system is that it shows you, like, all their rankings, like Bing Bang Boom. So the On Three industry ranking has Gradney 272. They have him listed as a safety, so the 24th best safety. Six. They have him 6'2", 200. So he's more 6'1". I think he's more in that 6'1" range. But at any rate, every recruiting service, that's another thing. They have a different height and weight. So, like, actually getting that verified is always important. But 24/7 has him 168. So those guys have him pretty high. And then like, you look at ESPN and Rivals, both have him as a 3-star recruit, which, like, is insane to me. If you put on if you go, I can't even remember, is it Will Turboff? I think some of the Texas guys that cover Texas for Nebraska and 24/7, but go to their Twitter page, watch his highlights from a recent camp, and you'll laugh at any recruiting service that has this guy rated as a 3-star
Well, that's
recruit.
because ESPN's recruiting rankings are so bare bones and horrible. So I'm not
Well, yeah.
surprised at all. Like
It's
they
like,
could care less about recruiting. Uh,
is like that Tom Van, what, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but you know what I'm saying? Tom Van Haren or whatever.
yeah,
Like, he is that the only guy that does ESPN? Like, does he put together the recruiting rankings by himself? Like, I don't get, like, what are they doing over there? But theirs are bad. Rivals aren't great either, but ESPN's are also, like, the worst.
if it's not the NBA or the NFL, then they don't care. That's the moral of the story of the ESPN. But and we mentioned this when Roger Gradney was recruited. I know we talked about it on one of our shows back in January, but he was very, I feel like, under recruited. I mean, he took he took official visits to, or excuse me, an unofficial visit to the University of Texas San Antonio back in April of 2022, and then he took an unofficial visit to Nebraska. Um, that March of 2023 during that big visit weekend, and he committed in January. So I feel like Gradney was a very under recruited player, which is a little bit surprising to me because, like you said, you look at his skills and there is definitely talent there. So I'm wondering if this is just an example of a player from a bigger state kind of falling through the cracks because there's just so many bodies, and good football players in the state of Texas.
I think that is exactly what's happening or what happened with Gradney. You mentioned it before. You've talked about it before. Guys out of Texas get lost in the shuffle. Deuce Vaughn is a name that we've mentioned.
Yeah.
That I've mentioned before. Was a 3-star recruit. Coming out of high school, which is crazy to me. And then when he was a freshman, he ran for like 200 yards against Texas when Kansas State beat him. So it's like those kids from Texas do remember that stuff when Texas and like Texas A&M don't offer them because it's like those are the two. If you're a kid from Texas, like those are the offers that you want. Now, whether you end up going there or not, like that's another thing. But you feel kind of disrespected if you're like a player from Texas and the Longhorns and Aggies like don't even offer you. And I think that goes back to like Matt Rule having those connections. Like I guarantee you that somebody was like, hey, you need to get this kid in your class before somebody else like realizes where he's at, Roger Gradney. And that's a big part of it, like Nebraska in those smaller schools, UTSA, like Texas Tech
Yeah.
also, who are doing a really good job in Texas, is like getting those guys that are really good players before like Texas and A&M notice that they're really good. Because like if you're A&M and like the Longhorns, you do have a really long list of like there's literally hundreds and hundreds of kids that are probably good enough to be at your program, and you can't offer all of them. So like to defend them from that perspective too, like you have to be smart about who you're talking to. And so, with a Roger Gradney or like a Gibson Pyle, Nebraska can get in there, get those guys. Like Gibson Pyle and Roger Gradney were committed before, and also Ian Flint, I believe. I think these guys were committed before like official visit season even started, and that tells you that Nebraska got in there early. They made the evaluations like these are guys that potentially Texas and all these other schools could recruit. Let's get them before that even gets to that point. So really smart job recruiting, I think, and that's where the Texas connections pay off for Matt Rule.
Pyle and Flint committed in April, and then Gradney, I believe, was, I want to say, January. Was it
Yeah,
the end of January?
he was the first.
Yeah.
He was like the first one. So yeah, I mean, that's even because like June is when you really start to see the official visits, and so that's three pretty good players from Texas that are locked up, before they even took official visits, basically.
Right, and I think that speaks to just how much of an impact Nebraska is making in the state of Texas in terms of being aggressive while recruiting down there. They don't just show up to camps because, Matt Rule's from Texas. This isn't a look at me tour for Matt Rule when he goes down to Texas. This is a let's go to work tour. This isn't a, you know, reunite with old buddies and I'm popular in Texas, so let me show my face for 5 seconds. This is a let's work and get to work and let's be serious about recruiting in the state. And I think it's paid off so far. And, I've always said recruits can tell when something's BS and when it's not. And I think recruits are finding out that Matt Rule is very real and very authentic. And he definitely comes across that way as well.
Yeah, there's no BS with that rule too, and I think that's helped. Like not to the recruitment of Davon Hall, for instance. I think if Matt Rule wasn't the head coach, that could have gone very differently because he did have the interest in the SEC schools. Tennessee jumped in the mix, but and I don't remember who reported this, so I'm not trying to take anybody's credit. I didn't. This isn't my reporting, but I know at one point, and maybe it might have been Sean Callahan, I think. But basically, like Matt Rule canceled Davon Hall's official visit. Like he wasn't coming for an official visit anymore. And I think basically, to paraphrase, it was kind of like we're not going to play this like dancing around.
Yeah.
Like cut the crap. Either you're interested in Nebraska or you're not. And at the end of the day, he was. And after that point, it was like, Coach Rule and his dad, I think, had a conversation. And once that happened, he was 100%. He was like committed, but Matt Rule, very much was willing to take that step of, like, if you don't want to be here, like, we don't want to, we're not going to waste our resources recruiting you just for the fun of it. Going back to like the Brandon Baker thing, like, I really don't think that Matt Rule and company would let Brandon Baker take a visit unless they thought he was serious about like committing. So I really think that genuine part of him, really does come off as recruiting. Like, we're recruiting you seriously. Whether you're serious about us, that's another question. But so I definitely think there's been a few of those moments in this class, and it's paid off the way that he, is not afraid to tell the truth to players. And Daniel Kaelin's another.
I was just about to
Um,
say, yeah.
yeah, he was very honest with Daniel Kaelin, and that played out exactly the way they basically said, like, the second we don't know about, and basically the
Yeah.
second, literally the second Nebraska got word, like, Foley was on the horn to Daniel Kaelin, and they went after him hard, and it paid off. So it's all worked out pretty well.
Yeah, and like I was just about to say, the Kalen recruitment, I mean, I think that's another example of him being authentic, him being real with the player. And, you know, it it pays to be real with players even if it's something that they may not want to hear. And, I think that's important as well. And, I'll be interested to see what happens with Baker. I mean, I know Mitch kind of thinks we're on the outside looking in, and quite honestly, I do as well. But it seems like Nebraska, and this is another thing that's been really impressive. Once they get recruits on campus, they're able to seal the deal quite a bit if they really want the guy. Well, I
Mhm.
mean, we saw that in June with the big recruiting month. They were able to seal a deal with a lot of players once the players were able to get on campus. So we'll see what happens there.
And to Mitch's point, I mean, just thinking like, saying we aren't recruiting Baker. I mean, I think a lot of the stuff, a lot of the buzz is like coming from the Baker side of things, right? Like, we're not really seeing, like, we haven't seen, when's the last time we've seen a Nebraska, coach? Like, we haven't seen, I mean, and I know there's different windows for this and stuff, but, we haven't seen a Nebraska coach like visit
Yeah.
Baker. You know what I mean? It's all been
Because there
social.
would be reporting if a coach visited Baker.
Right, or different, so it's been all like social media driven on the Baker side of things. Now, there is this talk of a visit, but again, that could just be like Brandon Baker talking to like a reporter from, on three or somebody, like, yeah, I'm thinking about taking a visit to Nebraska. Like, yeah, you could be. That doesn't mean that Nebraska's giving you one of their 56 official visits. So I
Yeah.
mean, that's where it's all. Now, that being said, if Brandon Baker calls up, Donovan Raiola and is like, yeah, I want to take an official visit, they probably will be like, I'm sure there'll be some back and forth, but, so that's where it's like, it's interesting if he's going to take an official visit. Like, I feel like the Nebraska staff, is going to have to approve that. And I don't think they're going to do that unless they feel like he's truly like interested in it, because I do think that there is some of what Mitch is saying is true. And we've said this before too. Like, some of this is just trying to drum up, kind of that excitement and that fan support. There's been guys that, like, I mean, I feel like Nebraska's never even talked to them, and they'll just like throw the Huskers in their top 8 or top 5, like, before.
Terrence Lewis.
Yeah, just to have that, because
He used
Husker Nation will come.
he used to play the social media game so bad, like, well, good, but he just like hopped from school to school. First it was Miami, then it was this, blah 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 blah. But the recruits know how to play the social media game now, and that's something to take into account as well. And I'll be interested to see when the Bricks decision happens, because I think the Bricks decision, or lack thereof, or if he doesn't decide or whatever, will tell a lot about what Baker's going to do as well.
I think so too. And we'll see if there's any, there's some other offensive linemen that'll be on the board. Some other names that I'm going to be really watching out, like Jay Sean Ross. Is he going to take a visit? Because that would be, if he takes an official visit, I think that would be, a huge, sign. Caleb Benning, man, is he gonna make this? Everybody's saying that he's gonna take this unofficial visit at the end of July, and it's like, different sites. It's like some act like it's 24/7, like they make it seem like it's like a for firm thing. On three, not quite as much. And so we'll see if he takes that visit, though. That this unofficial, late kind of not dead period, when the dead period ends at the end of July. If he takes that visit in that short window, then I think Nebraska is going to be, in the mix to land his commitment. But if not, then I feel like Amari Sanders is coming down the pipe in early July. or
I
early
was in,
August, excuse me.
yeah, no, I was just gonna say it's July 22nd, so we'll find out soon.
Yep.
We'll
Yeah.
find out soon, and it's kind of weird. You talk about quiet recruitments. Sanders got some crystal ball projections a couple weeks ago, and now we really haven't heard a ton, and we still don't know what's going on with Benning. So if you talk about hypothetically landing bricks, landing maybe either Sanders or Benning, and let's just say for the heck of it, Baker, for example, that puts us at 26 kids now,
We're
or
24 right
27.
now, I
So
believe.
27
Yeah.
if we hypothetically added those three, which is a huge class. So I'm wondering if there will be attrition, at certain positions, um, either this year or during camp next year as well.
I think so. I think it's just an idea, because like even Michigan too, and Nebraska's not these aren't the only programs doing it, but Michigan's already at like 26 commitments right now, and Nebraska's at 24. And so I think it's these programs making like a decision, like we're not gonna transfer portal recruit like like UCLA over the like since Chip Kelly's been the coach. I don't think they've ever signed 20 kids in a class. Now we'll see. We'll look back, and I'm not sure if that's changed this year, but I just think like certain schools are making a conscious choice. Like we're going to have like a double digit transfer portal class every single year. And I just don't think that Matt Rule's made that choice. I think he did it this year because he had to out of necessity. But you look at like even the later period, they weren't like diving in after every transfer portal guy. They were looking at some guys that could help over a multi-year kind of process. And I think that he's really trying to make that high school, recruiting investment. And so I think Nebraska is going to be choosy about the portal, but I think they feel like that numbers thing will work out by itself because there's going to be guys, like you can see where the numbers are like receivers going to stack up. You can see where even in the secondary, there could be some potential guys. So the numbers thing I think will always kind of work out. There's guys that go to the NFL, blah 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 blah. You know what I mean? So in terms of the recruiting, that part of it, I think it'll get close to 30. I don't think they're going to quite get to 30, but
No.
probably like 27, 28. So a very realistic number right now, I feel like. And if you would have asked me like in March or like February, I would have said 20. I would have said like 20, totally
Yeah,
20.
I would have
So
said the same thing.
yeah.
But it's nice, quite honestly, to you know not have to worry about cutting a kid or dismissing a kid from a program and losing your starting wide receiver. Like it's nice to have the flexibility at the positions and the depth to where you know you can make the tough choices. And I'm not rooting for kids to be cut, but it just speaks to you know recruiting isn't as, oh man, we got to land player X or else we don't have a starting Y receiver, or we got to land this tight end. We're recruiting him, in December, and he's got to be ready before the season because we need to slot him in right now. It's nice to have the flexibility to not have to rush and not have to do that, and to let the players develop. And that's something I think that was missing during the Scott Frost tenure, to say the least. And I hate to bring Frost back up, but here we go. This is it, Scott Frost.
Well, if we, yeah, they're just. I've taken many shots at Scott Frost, so man, I'll just yeah not do that today. But let's just say there wasn't a whole lot of planning. So any sort of like planning or thought process or that type of thing, like now that that's happening, it makes it seem like drastically different because there was none of that happening like during the Scott Frost era. I don't think so.
I'll just say
Um,
that his most difficult opponent was Miller Lite, and I'll leave it at that.
And Miller Lite was undefeated. The Margarita was undefeated against Scott Frost too. But Husker Chuck, thank you for getting us off this kind of crazy tangent that we're off. His question: do you think the first two games will be a good barometer of the rest of the season, or do you think this team will start out rough and improve as the
That's
year
a good
goes on?
question.
Good question. So I'll throw that to you, Danny.
No, because during the first two games of the season, you're establishing a new offense, you're establishing a new defense, you're still trying to get your feet wet a little bit. I do think there's a certain level to where if they get blown out, 56-0 by Colorado, then we should be a little bit worried. Or if we lose by, I don't know, 4 touchdowns to Minnesota to start off the season, then, maybe a little bit of panic. But I'm honestly, in terms of a rebuilding program, this is more for the long term. And I think if we go, I don't know, 3-9 or 4-8, even that, I wouldn't be happy, but I would understand it's a building program, and I think this thing can get built quickly. So I think even a bad season this year, I wouldn't necessarily hit the panic button quite yet.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily either. So, the Minnesota game I think is, the one I'm going to be, because like I know a lot of Nebraska fans like are drinking the Kool-Aid, and I am too. But I think there's a very realistic chance that like Minnesota definitely like beats us that first game because they just are. It was like I think Steve Sipple wrote it after Minnesota beat us last year. The difference between them and Nebraska right now is that Minnesota is a program, and say what you will about PJ Fleck, like he's built a solid
Yeah,
formula
he
there.
has.
Like they know how to win. Like Minnesota knows how to win like 7, 8 games in their sleep right now, and so that's Nebraska's going to have to go to that game and like good play solid football. Like Nebraska's not going to go there and like lose the turnover margin, and win
Yeah.
that game. You know what I mean? Like Nebraska has to probably win the turnover margin by 1 or 2 in that game. Like they're breaking in a new quarterback, new receivers. Like talent wise, I think Nebraska's right there, but that game, you just like it reminds me of the first game of the Jim Harbaugh era. They played at Utah was the first game, and they played okay but lost. And I really think that could be what happens in that game. And then Nebraska, and like a lot of people freak out, and then Nebraska comes back and beats Colorado by 10 the next week. So, I do think Nebraska's going to be a lot better by the end of the season, too. To answer your question, Husker Chuck, like I think if Minnesota and Nebraska played in like week 9, it could be a lot different story than week 1. Because I do think this Nebraska football team is going to be a lot better by week 9, 10 than they're going to be in week 1. So I don't necessarily take those as a barometer of the entire season. And that goes either way. Nebraska could go 2-0, and it could still be a much better team by, week 10 than they were in week 2.
Yeah, and I would much rather them honestly hit their stride late than to peak too early. Um, I think those first two games, it depending on if they get blown out or not. I don't think they'll tell the entire story because this is still a rebuilding program and there is still development and work to do.
So kind of a longer comment from Mitch, but we'll go ahead. Definitely, we'll read it out. So thank you for taking the time to comment, Mitch. We super appreciate it. Everybody, make sure that you hit the subscribe button too, hit the like button. But so for Baker, the reason you know, we got Preston away from Oregon is because Oregon told Preston they were holding a spot for Baker. Oregon has commits from 3 other tackles this cycle, 2 4-stars, 1 3-star. They want their 4th and final tackle to be Baker, who is an Oregon legacy. It's just funny how recruiting can be so fluid like this. This is the reason Illinois got Michael Berg. We told him, sorry, we're keeping our last tight end spot for Nelson. As for Baker, and then it kind of cuts off there. But yeah, definitely that totally makes sense. I totally could see that happening. So basically what Mitch is saying that, the reason we got Preston is because, they were like, hey, we're trying to hold that last spot for Baker Preston. So if you're ready to commit to Nebraska now, we're not, and he's bringing up the Michael Berg, the 3-star tight end from the state, I think it was maybe Creighton Prep or whatever. But anyway,
Yep.
he Nebraska offered him. He visited. Everything was looking good. Nebraska got projected for him, and then he ended up, going to was it Illinois or was it Iowa? I think it
It
was
was it
Iowa.
was Iowa. Yep.
Yeah, and a lot of people that week said hopefully that's a good sign for Carter Nelson, and it was. It ended up being so. Yeah, that definitely, I totally could see where you're coming from with that, and
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
I remember Baker after he took his visit to Oregon, like he tweeted something about the O or something like hits different or da da da.
They
And I
all do
thought
when they visit, though. I mean,
that's true, but like that was I think to me that felt like one of the
yeah.
most like genuine things that Brandon Baker has said about like all this recruitment that you could take to the bank. And so I do think also his brothers are very real, like his family too. And so like I don't even know if his brother was like on his trip to Nebraska with him. So like that definitely has been very true throughout this process. So I do think Oregon has been the favorite for a long time, and maybe he's just trying to drum up that excitement before he finally like announces the pledge. That's We've seen kids do that a ton of times, not just only in football, basketball. Like that's just a recruiting thing. Some of them just want to do that.
Which would make sense why we got predictions for Bricks so early. I mean, I think both of the like Baker and Bricks, Baker's decision, like I said, will affect what Bricks does. So I think honestly, like I said before, we land Grant Bricks.
And Husker Chucks agreed with our point and says, I think Minnesota gets the win in week 1,
Yeah,
probably not in week 9. So Chuck, probably a smart guy, probably not chugging down the Kool-Aid as hard as me, but I do, it's like I'm very that Minnesota game, like they're a pretty big favorite, and I understand, like I think we're gonna lose that one close. I think we come out of those, but as long as we come out of those first 2 games 1-1, as long as we win one of those 2 games, like I think we're fine. I'd rather, obviously, if I had my choice, like if you think it's a Big Ten game, like I would. It's really funny because if you gave me my choice, I probably would still take the Colorado game just because I just don't want any Colorado fans to be able to rub like that Coach Prime is better than Matt
they're
Rule
so
and all that crap.
loud. They are so
But
loud, and they are
they
so annoying.
they are annoying. And like just all those stupid videos of him and like the Tim Brewster, like Tim Brewster showing you how to be a man, and that's why Colorado's gonna like it's just so corny. It is
Tim
so
Brewster, play
corny.
for Prime. Let me sell out for Prime. Why don't you play for
Yeah.
Prime? Don't play for me. Play for Prime. Let me show you
Yeah.
how big of a sellout I am. Well, I'm actually we're
Yeah.
live, so I'm not going to say that. But
No, no. I mean, you're a fair point.
let me
You're
get on
making
my
some fair
knees for
points, but
Prime. Why don't you play for Prime? Don't even worry about me.
but yeah, it's that those videos they put, they're so corny. So even though thinking about it logically, like the Minnesota game is probably more important because it's a Big Ten game. I
Yeah,
just really want to beat those bastards. I really do. I hate Colorado, even
yeah.
though they're not even in the same league anymore. Like I just and then we lost that game to them like when Frost was the coach and we should have won. We were
Steven
dominating.
Montez.
Yeah, like we have to win this game. We just have to win that game. So I hope that we go 1-1 and beat Colorado.
I remember
So
that game because we ran out of. That was like I said, my first season covering Nebraska. We were good at half. I believe we led at half, if I'm not mistaken.
I think
And
by
then
10, maybe,
yeah,
maybe not.
yeah.
Maybe it was, or at least by should have. I felt like at halftime they led by 7 or 10, but should have been a lot more.
And then we ran out of breath, I guess, in the second half because we were gassed when it came time to play defense. I remember that. I was watching our lead slowly slip away.
So is that Fox? I'm not sure if that's an O. Fox
Yep,
Jarkuzal. Thank you again for joining the chat here. Feel we beat both Minnesota and Colorado. I don't think that that's out of the. I definitely think that that's possible for sure.
I definitely do too.
Do you think we play Michigan like 2021 or 2017? I'm blanking on the 2017 game a little bit, but the 2021 game I know obviously is fresh in my mind with the Adrian
That one was
Martinez.
tough. We should have won
Okay.
that one.
So Husker Chuck, we start 5-0 and buying 1,000 gallons of Kool-Aid. That's right, man. I could see it. Well, and that's the thing is like that Michigan game. See, the thing about the Michigan game that's interesting because we say we go beat Minnesota and then we are going to beat Colorado. Like we are going to just like we're going to de-pants Colorado. Like that's just what's going to happen. So, and then we come home and add the easier non-conference games. Then we're going to that Michigan game undefeated. And like it just has a totally different feel than I do feel very much like that game is going to feel like the 2021 game where
Yeah,
Nebraska fans are like going to be insanely excited about it. Michigan, I'm not saying they're going to overlook Nebraska, but it's like I feel like that's just going to be one of the games on their schedule that's going to be more difficult than they realize. Just from you're playing on the road, and Nebraska like has not beaten a team like Michigan that's undefeated or like ranked really high in a long time, and I just feel like that's going to be a tough game. I don't know that the Nebraska is going to win, but it would not surprise me if Nebraska covered the spread and if it was like closer than the experts think, is like Lee Corso likes to say on College Game Day. I really think that that's going to be one of those games for Nebraska. It's going to be really close against Michigan. Maybe they'll even win it. Who knows?
because even last year, Nebraska held their own until again the second half. Michigan started absolutely running the football, and we ran out of gas, understandably. So, I mean, that 2021 game was absolutely electric. I mean, as everybody likes to say, best 3-9 team in history. So,
Tim Fairnow, you did a little miss the Brandon Baker discussion a little bit. Basically, in a whole roundabout, we all kind of agree at the same point. Like, we think he's just kind of like grandstanding essentially. So either take an official visit, Brandon, or just shut up about Nebraska. How about, can we all agree with that? Is that fair?
yeah, that is totally fair. I mean, because I don't understand.
So
Like,
here's another point for that Mitch was talking about with Minnesota, and he does make some points. So basically, I don't understand. This is Mitch again, Carlson. I don't understand the love for Minnesota. Last year with our backup QB and interim coach, they beat us by a whopping 7 points. Since then, they lost their best RB ever, their interior O-line, their QB, their offensive coordinator, 3 starting defensive backs, 2 starting linebackers, and their best D linemen. Obviously, they are a good program, and they've had our numbers late. I'm not saying we'll win the game, but I can't say Minnesota will win either. And you're totally right. They definitely, Muhammad. I'm totally blanking on the name, but Muhammad, what's the
Ibrahim.
quote? Ibrahim. Like he took that game over the second half. They were like, Mo Ibrahim, here you go. The quarterback basically made like one good play, but we should have won that game. We should
Yeah.
have been up by more than like 10 points or whatever it was at the end of that first half. So, you know, I do think
Well,
that there's some points of some fairness to that, saying like Minnesota is more like in our head than it is actually like them being better than us on
yeah.
paper. And if we like the last 2 years, like if we had just not beaten ourselves, we would have beaten Minnesota, no
Yeah.
doubt about it. And so there's a very strong part of me that just thinks like if we go in there, because I don't think Minnesota's going to beat us in the trenches this year, I really don't. And if we just don't beat ourselves, like we definitely could win that game, 100%.
And I think one of the things that kind of scares me about Minnesota is that PJ Fleck will not make any crazy adjustments to try to be flashy or try to play sexy football. If running the football is working, for example, that's what he'll do. He'll run the football, he'll wear down the defense, he'll find something that, Nebraska, for example, is struggling with at that point in the game, and he'll just keep doing it. I mean, you all, I'm sure, remember the Rodney Smith, Muhammad Ibrahim absolute, blitzkrieg of rushing in 2019, actually, where they absolutely ran the football all over us. And last year, they didn't really do anything crazy either. Like Chris mentioned, all their quarterback had to do was throw a pass here and there, and they just handed the ball off to their running backs. And they slowly eroded away our defense and had excellent clock management and, won the football game. So I think the kind of wariness with Minnesota stems from the fact that whatever weakness they see in an opponent, whatever weakness a PJ Fleck team sees in an opponent, he'll go and attack it and, try to see how much, he can cause, the opposition to get uncomfortable.
But I definitely agree. Like if we had Casey Thompson
Oh,
in
yeah.
that game, we would have won. Because like I remember like the entire first half, Minnesota didn't do anything, but we just could not move the football offensively, and so it just like it was they kept themselves in it essentially, and we should have went up to half like up 20-3, and like so I just really feel like if it's a similar situation, it's going to be game over. But yeah, in terms of
And also, Mark Whipple helped
Michigan,
Minnesota when he
yeah,
did 72 three and outs and had the defense out
yeah.
there within 2 minutes.
And wouldn't give the even though Anthony Grant was averaging like
He
5 yards
he
a
had a great
carry,
he had
he
a
just like
great game, and it was just like, what are
yeah.
you doing?
Anthony Grant was so anyway, but and Michigan, yes, they do have 7. They do have a lot of guys that are probably going to be like going to the NFL, maybe
Yeah.
7, 8 guys on their offensive line. So that's the kind of O line that we need to build, and that game's going to be tough, for sure. I just have a feeling that Matt Rule is going to have Nebraska in the mix. Not saying they're going to win, but I think Nebraska's like, I think Michigan's going to be like wiping sweat from their brow when they get out of the field at Lincoln Memorial Stadium.
It's gonna be a fun atmosphere.
So it is for sure. At this rate, guys, we better should wrap it up. My blood sugar is getting a little bit low. Better go get a snack and some breakfast. So thank you everybody for coming
Yeah.
on. We're going to be having these chats every Saturday morning here throughout the entire 2023 season. So start your ride with Husker Big Red now. Hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit the alert button on your YouTube channel so you hit all of our content. Every Monday we'll have our podcast. We'll have other chats during the week too. As the season kind of gets closer, but we're gonna have pregame, postgame, and you can even watch Husker games with us. We have this thing called Playback. We'll have some more comments, on how to check up with that during the regular season. But make sure that you guys, everybody, have a great weekend. And as always, go Big Red.
Go Big Red. Thank you, everybody.